I wanted to talk about hip hop music for the entirety of our episodes because I can go on for 3 hours about hip hop
Let's
and
do it.
just the goats. And I know you're a music guy.
I am.
You're kind of well versed in all music.
I am. Yes.
I'm more of a. I'm more of a. I stay in my lane, so to speak. I try and venture out,
Okay.
but what I like is what I like, and so I kind of stick in the hip hop realm. I gotta hear your top 5 dead or alive, greatest of all time hip hop artists ever.
All right. It's a difficult one, and I think that my criteria for me,
Should we start with that? Should we start with criteria before we give our lists?
yeah, you could start with
What's your
criteria.
criteria?
I'll kind of give you the way I look at it. Not even necessarily criteria, but the way I look at it. And I think the way I look at it for me is, and for any music person who's out there, like, give yourself a criteria when you're talking about some of these things. Like, at least an understanding as to why you do these. You pick the people you pick. And for me, I pick people based off of what I was able to listen to in its time. Now, obviously, you can go back and listen to people, and you can, but I didn't grow up in certain eras. So, like, I can't say, for me, it's hard to say Biggie and Tupac. Only because, not that I don't listen to them, not that I didn't listen to their music, but, like, I wasn't around for that time. I wasn't listening to music at that time. So, like, I started listening to music probably when I was around, like, 6, 7 years old. So, like, and understanding the music, understanding sound, and understanding sonics and cadences and things like that gravitated to me, which was essentially the catchiness, right? Like, that's what you pick up on when you're a kid. And then as you grow up, like, you get formative years. Music changes. You listen to certain people, and those things start to kind of form the way you look at music and, like, how it's supposed to kind of sound. And then you move into a different area, and then you move into a different area, and then you start listening to different music that's around you because of maybe a different town that you live in, predominantly white, predominantly Spanish, predominantly black. Like, people will learn things along the way. And now we're in a place where you listen to music based off of what you can consume as quickly as possible on a streaming service. So, that being said, like, you're getting fed so much different styles of music, which is a great thing if you're interested in a lot of music. But some people still do like to sit with albums. People still do like to sit with an album that they heard 6 months ago and then go back to it, and they're continuously listening to it. Now it's really difficult to still do, because by the time you listen to last week's album, there's a new one coming out from somebody else. And so you're hitting you over the head. Music is kind of like in the content game, right? Like, you may have not even gotten through a podcast yet before the next one comes out. And so it's a little difficult, but so that's kind of where I look at music. It's like, I wasn't in that era, and a lot of the things changed. So my top 5, I would say, and a lot of this is in no order. I'm going to say Drake, J. Cole. I don't put Kendrick in there for me, although I do love Kendrick. I'll say Kanye's in there, Jay-Z's in there, and I want to give probably Wayne.
Love that. I love Wayne. I love that. He's in mine.
5 based off of timing of music that I started listening. What resonated with me as early as, like, probably 10 years old of listening, 10 to 11 years old of listening to rap, because I have older brothers who were listening to rap before I was. And it looks like I didn't listen the way that music was, and I started listening on my own. And we went through eras. Like, I think you didn't even go through some of the eras that I went through. Like, we went through the LimeWire and FrostWire era. And then we went through the DatPiff and LimeWire and FrostWire era, Apple iTunes era, and then we went through Apple Music, SoundCloud, Pandora, like, all of that stuff where you started to get to things. And I was just in the middle of the era of getting the album in the plastic, go on your bike to Walmart to go pick up the album, come back, put it in your CD player, put it into your car, the 2004 Sienna. Like, that was the way that we did things. Now it's so fast and it's in your file already. So now the differences of music has changed. The way we consume it has changed. So I was also who should be in my top 5, but I would say he's probably based off the music he's making now that I'm not super in love with, but I was in love with his music, was Kanye. Kanye was in my top 5. I would put him in my top 6, only because just from a consistency level, he's always been excellent, but his music hasn't always gravitated for me lately.
Yeah.
And neither has Wayne, right? Like Wayne hasn't put out like a ton of music lately.
Not a ton, but what he's putting out right now is arguably some of his best. I gotta be honest.
And he always does reinvent himself, and he does put out music that I think it shakes the world up for that moment, which is good. But he's a guy who was used to making real albums. He would take you away if you go away for 2 to 3 years, give you a real project, and you'd sit with it for 3 to 6 months until he went on tour. And that was the difference, right? It's like that was a different type of what of what music was. Another guy who I would put in my top 10 from just like growing up with the music and like watching the growth of this person would be, nobody says this guy, but 2 Chainz. Like 2 Chainz is the guy for me that like, he took me from parties to like the music that was, a little bit more introspective to he's been with every one of your favorite artists making music. Like if you put in like, and especially now, I don't look at the top 10 as somebody who like has to be so lyrically engaging every time. I'm just looking at what I love about the music and what I think transcended and helped me form my life musically. Like he was a guy who I would say he's in my top 10 or 15. Like I love 2 Chainz music. I think that he was a guy who helped us grow up, who else? Wale helped us grow up, but learned a lot about life listening to Wale. And you should, if you're listening to the music the right way, in my opinion. Like, I think you're supposed to learn something from your artist. But if you're looking at top 10 artists, like that's a whole other conversation. But let me listen to you. What's your top 5 or top 10?
I take a wildly different approach, I think, than you do.
Okay.
Because I just, the way I've come up and listened to music is just probably different than you did. You like what resonates with you and what you connect with, which I do too. I love it. It's just a lot of what I listen to and what I like to listen to audibly, I don't resonate with. Like I'm not gonna sit here and say I relate to Tupac and Biggie talking about what they talk about. Right. I just don't. But I still love their music. And if you weren't around in that area, I'm younger than you. I wasn't around in that area, obviously.
No, for sure.
But that's what I like to listen to, and that's what I've always listened to. I'm a big lyricism guy. That's a lot of my, not a lot of my criteria, but that's definitely on my criteria.
Mm-hmm.
I was listening to you and putting names in my head. I have about 15 in my head right now, so we'll see what top 5 comes out first. All right, top 5 dead or alive. I'm going not in any order because I don't know. I don't have an order. Maybe I'll put them in order. Nas.
Okay.
I'm going Nas. I'm going Biggie. I'm going Eminem.
Okay.
I'm going Black Thought.
Okay.
And I'm going number 5. I'm going. I have to go Wayne. I have to.
Yeah, I like it.
And I was on the fence with Wayne, and then Big L would probably be top 10. Big L, Fat Joe. Before everybody knows Fat Joe for his big hits, but he made some banger albums.
He did. He made some good albums. Terror Squad and that whole era of him and Remy was a good era to be a part of. But like, it's so interesting when you say those guys, because like, what makes you gravitate to those guys?
Dude, I don't know. I don't know. I just started listening to them and it's just stuck. Like I'll listen to the new age of Like who do we got in the new age? We got Benny the Butcher and those guys,
Love
Griselda. Those
love Griselda.
I'm not a huge fan. My
Really?
brother is a huge fan of them, and I just
I
I
love
just don't.
I think
I'm
they have their
not.
own unique style that I think nobody else is doing. And like it sounds old school, but it's very new school as well, which is like it's hard to kind of put the two together and do it gracefully. And I think they do it gracefully. Like I think Westside Gunn is one of my favorite rappers right now. I love the style. I love the lifestyle and the culture aspect, which is like I think what is important in discuss music is like culture. What drive and music drives culture, fashion drives culture. And like if you can put the two or the three together in some way, I think you end up becoming an icon. Right. And like
Yeah.
that is a lot of that's where Jay-Z comes in. Right. Jay-Z was one of the first people who start putting things together when it came to the fashion side, to the also the music, and rapping about it in a way that sounded slick and those sounded fun and engaging. Right. I think Drake is a icon in that particular way as well. I think he does a really good job of basically making people do things inside the culture that like you're not used to doing. Right. That like
Yeah.
he shifts it. He moves it around because of his name, the way that he does, the way that he looks. And I think that's an interesting part. I think yeah, what are the reasons you listen to certain guys, and what kind of effect have they had when it comes to music?
Yeah, and I wish I had a good answer, but to be honest, I'm thinking about it. A lot of what I enjoy listening to is the storytelling, the beats. I'm a big beats person. If I don't like the beat, it's gonna be hard for me personally.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking of who I didn't put on the list. Kendrick Lamar, I didn't put on there. Jay-Z, I should have put on there.
Well, I don't know if you should have, right? And like that's the
Okay, maybe not should have, but I didn't put on. They're in my top 10 for sure.
Yeah, and I think, and that's what's cool about creating a top 10. Like I think obviously top 10s, there's some things that are objectively right about top 10s. Like I think Jay-Z needs to be in everybody's top 10. Like if Jay-Z is not in everybody's top 10, then like you can't make a rap list. You know what I mean? Like you literally can't make a list without him not being in the top 10. Like I think everybody else in between that, I think Jay-Z, Eminem, Biggie, and Tupac within the top 10, then I just don't think you understand rap. Like I think that you've lost the identity. You don't know anything about it. But
there's just so many names like Lupe Fiasco. I've been listening to him a lot lately. I probably would have put
what he did, right? Think about who Lupe was to us. Like Lupe made about 3 to 5 songs, including Superstar, that when he put that out, like it changed the way that we looked at music. It changed the sound. It was a different sound, but it was so like when Superstar came out, when Good Life came out by Kanye, like that that upgraded the way that we kind of listen to music. You know what I mean? And like that made things sound a certain way. And like that part of it was important to when we were just starting to form our understanding of what music was. Like I remember that, what is that, 6th or 7th grade for me? Like it was 2010. Like when you think about him making some music at the time, and Kanye was already big, but then he made a song that was undeniable. It had this perfect sound, and that was when singles were real. Like that was when like putting a single out, he played that for like months before the album, and that was the song you had to gravitate to. Trent, my brother and I were just talking about it yesterday, about SZA. Like SZA is pop music, but they look at her as R&B, and like she's an R&B act. I would say she makes more alternative R&B, but she makes pop music, and that is what's popular, and that's why I think like certain people trend differently than others when it comes to the culture, right? Because SZA herself is also culture, and I think that's where like rap comes into play when it comes. It's bigger than that. You know what I mean? Like Taylor Swift is culture for the white girls, right? Like she's culture. Like what she does, how she may dress, how the other girls made, how she affects the way things change. that is why I believe that like part of your part of any rap conversation, you have to look at the way those people have affected culture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You saw it. I specifically just talking about the rap culture, and people were dressing how all these top rap guys were dressing in the late 90s, early 2000s, even 2010s going on. They were embracing the culture and doing the things that these guys were doing because it was just bigger than just the music itself. And that is very apparent with today's Taylor Swift, like you said. And that's just the trend that is going. It's more than just music. So I think that's definitely in consideration when naming some of these the biggest artists nowadays is how do they affect the world? Not even just, one culture or one location. How do you affect everybody? And how do you make a difference and change the culture and people follow you for what you do?
Right.
Because that's how you get, an impact in this music industry, at least in my opinion. I think being able to affect that many people is showing how good you are at something.
Right. And what's interesting about the rap conversation too is that people's top fives are going to be based off their region. Right? Like your top five is usually going to be based off of, like, think about all the people you just named. Like most of the guys you just named all were based out of the Northeast.
A lot of East Coast boys.
And it's a lot of, outside of Tupac, like, think about where rap started. Obviously, that they just did the Hip Hop 50 Festival over at Yankee Stadium. Like, that tells you something, right? That tells you where a lot of rap started and where it started to gravitate to, and and they obviously have West Coast artists there too. There's a massive influence there. But then what about the guys in Texas, right? Like if you listen to a Houston, and there's a certain sound in Houston, there's a certain sound in Atlanta, there's a certain sound in Detroit, right? Where like you got Eminem, Big Sean, Babyface Ray, Royce da 5'9", and then you go to Atlanta, and then Atlanta is, you take it back to Gucci Mane, to Juvenile, to, Young Thug, Gunna. And then you go to Memphis now. There's Moneybagg Yo, Young Dolph, Key Glock, Yo Gotti. Like, there's movements in all of these different places. So, like, I think if you talk to an Atlanta guy, that person would say, nah, none of those guys are in my top five. Maybe some of them, but like they're going to look at what their culture is there, right? And so that's what's so interesting about the debate is like, unless you're trying to hit all of the areas that have affected the world, like if in your like for especially like an artist perspective, right? Like if you're artist of top like 20 ever artists in like hip hop and R&B, like if Nelly's not in your top 10, then we can't have a conversation. Just from like fully controlling some of the culture. Let's talk about Air Force Ones. Like everybody started wearing Air Force Ones. Like think about that conversation. Like think about what we're doing there. Like the Gucci Mane. Like if Gucci Mane ain't in your top 25, 30 artists, like the way that they shifted culture, it doesn't always have to be the music either. Like Gucci Mane didn't have anything that was like super introspective. Jeezy didn't have a ton of things that were like, Jeezy had a lot of introspective stuff, but most of these guys are drug rappers, right? Which is in that realm, that's what people listen to. And that's part of because that was part of the fabric. That was part of what people could gravitate to, not only from like, where they were located, but also other people inside their cities could understand that particular struggle or plight or whatever it may be. And sometimes it's just super fly to listen to that type of stuff too. Like Buffalo's got a movement now. Like you talk to anybody from like upstate New York, they might look at Westside Gunn or Benny the Butcher as like their top 5 rappers ever. Right? So it's kind of like culture will shift that, and like also the timing of those things too. You talk to a Philly rap, you talk to anybody from Philadelphia, Meek Mill is their guy. He's their guy. Like it's Meek Mill, it's Big L, it's Freeway, guys like that, and who you could feel it when you listen to them. You can put yourself in that place. You can put yourself in Philadelphia, right?
Yeah.
Tory Lane. When I listen to Free Tory, if that's that's where everybody's at. I don't know where you're at with Tory Lanez, but
You know.
he, yeah, we can get into that one day.
Yeah, we
But
could talk about it.
He, whenever my brother and I talk about it every single time. When I get down to Miami, I travel to Miami a decent amount for work, for different things. Whenever I get to Miami, I always listen to Tory Lanez. Why? Because he makes me feel like I'm in Miami. Right? Like, and so like, but I don't know if I could put Tory in my top 10. I don't know if I could put Tory in my top 20. I love Tory Lanez, but it doesn't mean like he makes that culture move, right? When you go to Toronto, put on Drake and Party Next Door at the weekend, you'll feel like you're in Toronto, right? And you'll understand how they could create that type of music. So the conversation is very nuanced. And so like when we have criteria, we need to really get into it with criteria to know, like, if you're covering all the bases. Oakland, E40, those guys, right? Like, Too Short, way different type of music, but like it's culture, right? Like,
yeah, and culture. I love that. I love this conversation. I love talking about it because like I listen to a lot of hip hop music. I listen to a lot of music in general. Hip hop would be my number one most listened probably genre. Yeah. But
I'm an R&B guy.
I know you are. I know you are because I've been around you enough when you have music on that you're a big R&B guy. I know you are.
Huge R&B guy.
It's just because every time I have one of these conversations, I something new comes out of it that I think about, that I take with me that I didn't have before. And there was a lot of information there. And when I watch this back, I'll probably think about something different.
It's like insane to me to make like a top 10 if you haven't fully listened to all of like the regions of music. Like if you don't listen, and you don't have to actively be listening to it, but like if you haven't been able to fully understand and either appreciate or deny the types of music out there, it's very difficult to have that perspective, because it's like, you could put your top 10 and have 7 rappers from New York because you live here, right? Like you live in this general area, but then it's like, you don't even know what they were doing in the West Coast. Like, and you don't even know how that affected the music over there. Like numbers are numbers. I'm more so looking at impact, right? Like, impact on the way it feels. Like the impact, for example, like the impact that like PNB Rock had, right? God rest his soul. The impact that like PNB Rock had in Philadelphia, like at every Philly school when he put out the remix to, what was those Sway Lee and French Montana song?
Oh, I know it. I know it. The
song.
I know it. Man.
Unforgettable.
There.
Like the remix, when he put that out, the way that affected Philadelphia when I was at that time, like when I was out there, was unparalleled to any. Like you heard that at any club, any bar, that turned the place up, and that's where you got to get to, right? You'll start to understand a little bit more about the music side when you're outside, right?
Yeah,
you're not outside yet, but once you get outside, you're gonna understand the difference. Like that's where you hear certain things and how it impacts the people, right? And you don't always have to hear it outside. Sometimes you can hear it and you'll know, like, okay, this song's undeniable. Like, you can hear things outside, bro. Like, it's a different feeling. Like, I see what this is doing to people, right? I see how this is affecting the universe. When Sticky came out with Drake, and like when he put out Honestly Nevermind, people didn't like the album initially, but when you heard Sticky or Massive, you're like, okay, like this is gonna be one of those songs. Then you hear it in the club, and you're like, wait, this is one of those songs. Like I know this song now, and the way it affected people when you were out, like you see the way where people gravitate to, and it's just like that's all other like music theory conversation too, from like Sonics and all that stuff. We can get into.
Yeah. We can you can keep it going all day long with music, man. And I listened for a lot of that because you were just going, and I didn't want to ruin you had a flow.
Yeah, man. Listen, I can get into music for hours, bro. I can get into music for hours. Just like the concepts of it, the way that people look at it, the perception of culture and part of music, and like people not also giving certain cultures credit, And like specifically from the race aspect, right? Like I think that's a whole other conversation we'll get into, and like I want to get into that, but different people not giving credit to where the music came from, because it's open for everybody, it's open to the public. So I do want to have that conversation one day.